This is a story about how a small piece of paper, bought with the spare change from a coffee, can dismantle your familiar world and rebuild it according to a completely different blueprint. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those gray, forgettable days that vanish from your memory the moment they end. It was drizzling outside, a cold and annoying mist, and you were standing at a gas station, waiting for the tank to fill. Change was jingling in your pocket, and when the cashier with tired eyes suggested a lucky ticket, you just nodded without looking. You shoved it into the glove box between old receipts and insurance papers, forgetting it existed exactly 30 seconds later. There was no room for miracles in your life. There was only work, a mortgage, and a perpetually buzzing refrigerator. 2 weeks passed. That ticket managed to get covered in a layer of dust. It was a Sunday evening, that specific gloomy hour when the weight of the coming Monday already begins to press down on your shoulders. You were sitting in the living room with your family, lazily flipping through channels, looking for anything to distract you from thoughts of the work week ahead. The TV was just background noise, playing a lottery drawing. Usually, you'd change the channel instantly, but this time, laziness won. The host, in a blindingly white suit, began to spin the drum. And then, like a flash of lightning, the image of that ticket in the glove box appeared. Something pricked inside you, a silly sense of curiosity. You reluctantly stood up, walked to the hallway, and stepped out into the rain to the car. After digging the crumpled scrap of paper out of the glove box, you returned to the house. Your family looked at you like you were losing your mind. You sat on the edge of the couch, holding the ticket with 2 fingers as if it were made of thin glass. On the screen, the balls rolled out one by one. The first number matched. The second number matched. The room grew quieter. The third, the fourth, your breathing became heavy. The 5th number. Your wife froze with a mug of tea in her hands, looking back and forth from the screen to your trembling fingers. When the final 6th ball rolled out, a silence fell over the room so heavy you could hear the clock ticking in the next room. $1 million. The numbers on the paper and the screen had aligned into a perfect line that had just crossed out your entire past life. The first few minutes weren't joy. It was shock, something akin to a concussion. Your brain simply refused to process the information. You just stared at that piece of paper and thought, this can't be real. You rechecked the numbers again and again until they started to blur. Your wife began to cry silently, while the kids, not fully grasping the scale of the moment, started jumping around. No one slept that night. You sat in the kitchen with the ticket lying in the center of the table, under a glass tumbler, like a rare museum exhibit. You spoke in whispers, terrified that if you spoke too loudly, the magic would dissipate. $1 million isn't just a number. It's a form of freedom that has suddenly dropped onto your head, and its weight is terrifying. Monday morning was the strangest of your life. The alarm went off as usual, but you didn't get up. You lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing that you no longer had to go to a place where you weren't valued. But the fear of losing the ticket was stronger than laziness. You slid it into an envelope, then into a book, and finally into a safe hidden under a pile of old laundry. The entire next day was spent in total paranoia. It felt like every passerby knew your secret, that every creak outside the door was a burglar. You checked the door locks a dozen times. You hadn't received a single cent yet, but you already felt like a target. The process of claiming the prize turned out to be far more mundane and bureaucratic than the movies suggest. You had to drive to the main lottery office in a different city, driving so carefully it was as if you were transporting a ton of nitroglycerin. In the office, you were met by people in gray suits. There were checks, signatures, lawyers, and endless forms. The hardest part was the waiting, several weeks for the money to pass all the audits and land in your account. During this time, you decided not to tell anyone. But as they say, walls have ears. Somehow, the information leaked. Maybe a clerk dropped a hint, or the gas station cashier remembered your face. That was when the real nightmare began. Your phone started exploding with calls from people you hadn't spoken to in 10 years. Third cousins and former classmates all suddenly just wanted to see how you were doing. But the journalists were the worst. They camped out by your entrance, tried to photograph you through the windows, and waited for your kids after school. Your life turned into a reality show against your will. You felt like a cornered animal. People on the street whispered behind your back, their eyes a mix of burning envy and false friendliness. At one point, you had to hire private security for a couple of weeks, just to go buy groceries without flashbulbs in your face. You realized that $1 million buys comfort, but it instantly incinerates privacy. When the money finally hit the account, The digits in the banking app looked fake. 6 zeros. The first impulse was to go out and buy everything. A sports car, luxury watches, designer clothes. But when you have the ability to buy everything, you suddenly realize you don't really want most of it. You and your wife sat for a long time making a list. You didn't buy a massive mansion. You knew that was a trap. Instead, you just paid off the mortgage on your old house. That was the first feeling of true relief. The realization that the roof over your head belonged to you 100%, and no one could ever take it away. Then came the spending on those who were actually there during the hard times. You helped your parents, renovated their old house, and paid for medical checkups they had always postponed. You set up education funds for the kids, an investment in their future that gave you peace of mind. You spent money on a trip, but not to a flashy resort. Instead, you took a 3-month tour through Iceland and Norway. You had always wanted to see the Northern Lights, and now you could do it without counting every cent on the restaurant menu. It was the first time you and your wife started talking to each other, not about debts, but about dreams. However, there were mistakes. At one point, the euphoria took over, and you invested a significant amount in an ultra-successful startup pitched by a suddenly reappeared friend. The project collapsed, and you lost $50,000. It was a painful lesson. Money attracts vultures. After that, you became much more cautious. You hired a financial advisor, an outsider who simply helped you not squander what was left. Most of the sum went into index funds to create a stable income for the future. A year later, your life had changed beyond recognition. Yet, it stayed the same. You quit the job you hated to finally open your own woodworking shop, a hobby you loved that had never paid the bills. Your wife started studying landscape design. It turns out that when the fear of starving isn't hanging over you, you start doing what you were actually born to do. You traded the car for a new, safe, but inconspicuous model. You stopped arguing about the electricity bills, and that was the most important purchase of all. The journalists eventually moved on. The neighbors got used to you, though some could never forgive your luck. You realized that $1 million isn't a magic wand. It's just a magnifying glass. If you were miserable, money will make your misery larger. If you were lonely, it will only highlight your isolation. But if you had a foundation, family, a craft you love, honesty, it becomes the fuel that allows you to soar. Now, looking at that same crumpled ticket, which you framed and hung in your workshop, you remember that rainy Tuesday. You don't feel like a victor. You feel like a man who was given a second chance to live his life correctly. Winning the lottery isn't a finish line. It's a starter pistol. And the hardest part of this marathon isn't avoiding spending it all. It's remaining the same guy who once stood at a gas station in the rain, just wanting his old refrigerator to stop making so much noise. You learn to value the time that money bought you. Time to be together, to create, and to just breathe without looking at tomorrow with dread. That is the real jackpot. If you enjoyed our content, please give us a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. This little signal helps us know that we should keep delighting you with our content.